Thank you for joining us for this presentation and for your interest in our reading and language intervention. To just give you a little bit of background, the reason we were able to develop RLI is that we obtained a significant grant from the UK Big Lottery Fund in partnership with experts in reading and language at the University of York. This enabled us to put together all our previous knowledge and experience to design a program and then to go out to schools and evaluate it. And in this presentation, I want to give you the highlights, to give you enough information about our thinking, our evidence base, and then what is involved in actually delivering the program in school. So what is RLI? Well, it's an intervention that's designed to be delivered in school to teach children with Down syndrome in primary elementary school years. We evaluated it with children who were 5 to 11 years during the study. It's designed, of course, to teach them to read and improve their spoken language. It includes a reading strand and a language strand, and there is a daily lesson, 20-25 minute lesson for each strand. These can be done one after the other in a 45-minute lesson, or they can be delivered at different times of day, depending on what works best for the child in school. There is a fixed structure to each lesson, and the structure is always the same, but the content taught in each lesson is entirely tailored to the individual child. So each child, the material that they're learning is what's appropriate for that child at that time, and it can be linked to the school curriculum. Another important feature is that the teaching is in small steps. We encourage repetition, practice, consolidation to ensure children are learning and recording their progress, so we are moving in small steps, building on what they already know. We also demonstrated that RLI can be taught effectively by teaching assistants or paraprofessionals, and these are assistants in classrooms who are not trained teachers. So, why did we develop RLI? Well, obviously the short answer to that is because we wanted to improve reading instruction and language instruction in schools, because these are areas where we know the children are going to have delays and difficulties. So we start off, of course, with the basis of what do we know about their language development and their reading development, and where do we work from there. Children with Down syndrome vary widely in abilities, disabilities, strengths and weaknesses. But most will have cognitive delays or learning difficulties, different languages in different countries, intellectual disability. Okay. Most are going to be learning more slowly. In recent years, we've learned a lot about how Down syndrome does affect development, and that they have a profile of strengths and weaknesses. Some areas of development more affected than others, and if we use this, we can teach more effectively. We can build on strengths and compensate for weaknesses. Most children with Down syndrome have delayed spoken language, and it's often the area of their development that is the most delayed, and we've always argued should be a focus for intervention. In other words, on school curriculum, there should always be a focus on improving the children's spoken language, teaching them to talk better. We also know they have delays in verbal short-term memory. That's part of the working memory system. It's really important to use your working memory system to listen and learn. You're all using it to listen to me. And there's a verbal short-term component and a visual short-term component. And we know for the youngsters with Down syndrome, visual short-term memory works better. Verbal short-term memory tends to be impaired. That leads to the fact that learning from listening is difficult, but visual learning is more effective. If we support teaching with visual supports, it's going to help the children. We also knew when we started that many children with Down syndrome can learn to read. Some can learn to read very well. There's a wide range of outcomes. But also, we know that most children will need that literacy teaching adapted, smaller steps, taking account of their language delay. and a number of other things we may need to think about. Before we applied for the research grant, we did a survey of teachers in our schools to see what they thought. They told us that they thought the children with Down syndrome in their classrooms could probably be reading better than they were, but they, the teachers, needed more guidance. So we set off to design RLI. How did we decide to design it? Well, we took the same approach as we take with all our research. We started by looking at what is known about how all children learn to read and to talk, and what effective interventions there are for delayed readers and those with delayed language. And you've got a summary of that on the slide. Basically, research by our research partners in York had shown very clearly in a number of studies that effective reading interventions for delayed readers combine teaching them about phonics and letter sounds and how they work for decoding and spelling, with teaching sight words, words learned by sight, particularly all those irregular words in English, and combining this with successful book reading from the outset. So the core is reading a book successfully, and the sight word teaching and the phonics teaching is linked to that. The group in York and some in the US had shown that this approach works for many children with Down syndrome, but not all. And when you look at those who are not responding, they tend to be the ones with delayed language. So we know already that our children with Down syndrome have delayed language. And the York group had shown that if you combine language teaching with reading teaching, then those non-responders may progress. So we thought we should take that on board, and we should be combining language teaching and reading teaching from the outset in our intervention. When designing the language instruction, we looked at the work of Beck and colleagues in the US, who've done a lot of work promoting the importance of language teaching in schools, and in particular expanding children's vocabulary. For our children, we wanted to teach new words because they've often got quite small vocabularies, very small compared to other children of their age. They haven't learned a lot of different words. We wanted to teach new words. Every new word is a new concept and a new bit of information about the world. We want to get those words into use in their spoken language. Remember, they understand more than they say. They struggle to learn grammar. So many children have limited grammar in their spoken language. We want to practice grammatically correct sentences. And we wanted to extend their understanding of words and realize that words have slightly different meanings when they're used in different contexts. And I'll explain more about that when we get to the language strand. But developing knowledge networks, linking words together by meaning, increasing the depth of understanding of vocabulary is important and often gets neglected when a child has intellectual disabilities and delays. So to summarise, we drew on what we know about language and learning and reading profiles for the children with Down syndrome. We drew on research into the most effective ways to teach reading and to teach language, adapted it for learners with Down syndrome, and then importantly, we were aware that there is not a lot of point in demonstrating a piece of research intervention works if it only works if you can send in researchers or highly trained experts to deliver it. It's not going to be taken up in schools. So we wanted to both design and show we could deliver this in a way that it was easy to implement. It didn't require a lot of expensive money and resources. Now, we've evaluated it with children in our inclusive schools because that's where most primary age children are in the UK. But of course, an evidence-based programme adapted for children with Down syndrome should equally help children in special classes. So how did we adapt teaching for children with Down syndrome and what we know about their learning profile? Well, because they're going to learn more slowly, we ensured the programme moved in small steps. It builds in intensive daily instruction and opportunities for repetition, practice, consolidation to ensure children are learning, and we're going to build on what they already know. We don't move too quickly. For the short-term memory, we know their visual memory is better than verbal, so visual supports for learning wherever possible. We knew at the outset comprehension was going to be a challenge. If you have children with language delay and verbal short-term memory difficulties, we know reading and understanding what they read is going to be more difficult. So we emphasise support for comprehension from the outset. We've always done this with our reading instruction to make sure if a child can read a single word, they can read it and put it on the correct picture from a choice of distractors, and the same if they can read a sentence, they need to be able to put it on the correct picture from a choice of distracting pictures. Comprehension matters. When we get to reading texts, of course, the child needs to be able to tell us about the story. So maintaining attention, managing behaviour, we knew that it's sometimes difficult for children with Down syndrome to maintain their attention. And if a task is difficult, they may wish to avoid it with behaviour strategies. So we designed short, varied activities, a common structure, and teaching approaches that make learning fun and prompt success. And we soon had feedback that the fixed structure every day was soon learned by the children, and it did improve behaviour and attention. We knew we needed to build in more support for phonics. Many of the children will have hearing loss. They won't necessarily be able to hear all the words or hear all the sounds or say all the sounds at the start of instruction. So we knew we need to think about more support for teaching that. And then it was very important that the whole programme is adapted for each individual child, that whatever you're teaching, the content, the words you're teaching, the books, the letter sounds, the vocabulary, the sentences, is all at a level that's appropriate for that child. So how did we go about measuring the effectiveness of this intervention? Well, we evaluated it with a randomized control trial, and that is considered to be the gold standard way to evaluate an intervention. You compare one group on the intervention with a group on some other teaching program, and if the group on the intervention go faster, then you assume that is the result of the intervention and not just ordinary progress. So we recruited 57 children with Down syndrome around our centres in the north and south of the country. These were between 5 and 10 years old at the start. The oldest were 10-year-olds because we wanted them to stay in the primary school system for another 2 years. They were all in their local general education schools, so they were in inclusive schools, and they were full members of a general education class because that is where most children with Down syndrome of this age are in the UK education system. We had no exclusion criteria, and this can be quite important because you may be thinking, okay, they did this as a piece of research, but how does it apply to the child in my classroom? Well, we took everybody who wanted to take part. There were no exclusion criteria, so this group of children varied widely in abilities, strengths, weaknesses, additional needs. They really do represent the whole range of youngsters with Down syndrome. And we're going to come on to talk a little bit more about individual differences later. The children were then randomly divided into 2 groups by the computer, and they didn't differ on any significant criteria at the start. We trained the teaching assistants to deliver RLI in a 2-day training program. Before they started, all the children were assessed on a range of reading, language, ability, behaviour measures, and then they set off on the intervention. So one group went on with teaching as usual, and the other group went on to the RLI intervention. The teaching as usual group were also getting one-to-one support from teaching assistants in the classroom and joining in literacy lessons. So it is probable that their literacy teaching was better than many children with Down syndrome actually receive. So at the end of 20 weeks, we repeated all those reading and language assessments, and that's the point at which we can compare the progress of the children on the intervention with those who were teaching as usual. After that, all the children went on to the intervention for a further 20-week block, and this meant that we could then begin to look at things like rates of progress and individual differences across a group of over 50 children. Right. We've published the data up to the 40-week period in a peer-reviewed journal, which you can see there. You can click on that link and get free access to that paper, and that gives you the science and the statistical analyses and so on, all the information about the study. There's more information if you click that link to our research website, to our Reading and Language Intervention website. And there we've described the study perhaps in more reader-friendly language, and also added more information about individual differences and the data we collected at the last time point. In this session, of course, I'm going to concentrate on presenting the intervention to you in more practical detail. This slide provides a snapshot of the main findings from the randomized controlled trial part of our evaluation. And it's just a snapshot. Simply to understand this, wherever those blue bars go up, the intervention group went faster than the teaching as usual group. Some of those gains are small and not significant. Some of those gains are larger. Where the vertical line does not cross the horizontal line, those are the measures that are statistically significant. The D value is effect sizes, and for those interested in the statistics, effect sizes over 0.25 are considered educationally significant by the What Works Clearinghouse of the Institute of Education Sciences in the US. Now, this is probably what people are more interested in. This is a bit of an explanation of the findings. Those findings that were statistically significant, therefore unlikely to be due to chance, reflected the direct teaching, which is what you would hope. The children who've had more teaching are making more progress with their letter sound knowledge, their sight word reading, their ability to blend phonemes into a word, and their taught expressive vocabulary. And these reflect the directly taught skills. Now, we didn't see gains where you've got those very small gains. We didn't see gains on spelling, being able to read non-words. Those are nonsense words where you need your phonics knowledge to sound them out and blend them. And we didn't see gains on standardized language measures. But really, we wouldn't have expected that. Many of these children were beginners, not all, but many were complete beginners. And we wouldn't expect in 20 weeks them to have progressed enough with understanding reading and developing their reading skills to be able to spell or read non-words. Also at this stage, we would not necessarily have expected small gains in language to translate to a gain on a standardized measure. The weighting control group went faster when they moved to the intervention. This meant we had another little trial where we had progress for that group when they were doing teaching as usual, and then we had progress over the next 20 weeks when they moved on to the intervention, and they also went faster on the intervention. Okay, so the study supports the overall view that the reading and language intervention is more effective, and that's important for education policy, that group data. One group progressed faster than the other. However, we can have group effects, but it doesn't mean that every child went at the same rate. And when it comes to translating this to the classroom, that may be what is of more interest. And we went on to look at whether we could see any predictors at the start that showed us which children made more rapid progress, because these may be important for teachers and practitioners. And this is in the published research paper. We looked at this, and the predictors that came out with statistical significance were age, language understanding, and amount of teaching. Now, the first finding may be a surprise. The younger children made more progress. Those that started as soon as they got into the school system at 5 and 6 made the most reading progress. Okay, and I should say the focus here is reading progress. Okay, now what this means, of course, practically, is that children with Down syndrome should start to receive high-quality literacy teaching at the same age as other children, despite their language and cognitive delay. They should be getting reading instruction at the ages of 5 and 6 with other children. Not surprisingly, those who had better language understanding made more progress. We'd expect that. The amount of language children have influences reading progress. And then importantly, intensity matters. The number of lessons children received affected progress. Teaching matters. The more teaching, the more effective teaching children receive, the more likely they are to make progress. Okay, small steps and intensity. However, even when you've looked at this, not all 5 and 6-year-olds went fast, and some older children did. And if you go to the RLI section of the website, you'll see the scatter plots that show you the progress of the children, and you can see very clearly that these are overall predictors, but also, of course, there are individual differences. There are children. So, and we went on to look at the children who made very little reading progress at the end of 2 years. And we couldn't have predicted which children those were going to be at the start. They weren't the children with the lowest measures of non-verbal ability. They weren't the children who had more difficult behaviour that might disrupt learning. They weren't the children with the most delayed language. So we couldn't have predicted at the start successfully for individual children their rates of progress. The only advice we can give you is to try it and not to assume a child is too delayed to make progress. You need to give all children a chance to learn to read from the ages of 5 and 6, to develop their spoken language and continue to do that. And that's the advice of the whole research team based on the data we collected. What about the benefits then for assistance? We've talked about the benefits for the children, which is obviously uppermost in people's minds. Well, in summary, of course, the assistants reported back, sorry, they also benefited considerably. At the start, they were daunted. There was a lot to learn. And I think that will be your reaction to taking up the program. Gosh, it looks like there's quite a lot to learn here. We'd really encourage you to stick with it because our assistants found once you get the hang of it, it's actually really easy. There's a system, a structure, and it's easy to implement. So it may seem a little daunting at the start, but it isn't. Their skills and expertise improved. They reported increased confidence, self-esteem, and greater job satisfaction. And also, of course, that it worked for other children that they worked with. We'd also point out that we saw and we had independent reports of progress in the classroom with children where it didn't show up necessarily for that child on a standardized test, possibly because the steps in standardized tests are quite large, so small amounts of progress might not yet register. Also, children with Down syndrome, of course, do not always do their best in standardized assessment situations. So we got quite a lot of feedback in the classroom, and you can read those comments for yourself. And this was independent. It's not just our views. Okay. Since we got to this point then, we've rolled the program out. Having got evidence that it was effective, it improved progress, we have money in the last year of the project to develop the handbook and the resources. And the resources are 2 DVDs with examples of all the children of different abilities doing all the activities, and a CD with all the published materials that I'll tell you about in a moment that you need to implement. So the handbook and resources come with everything you need to implement, and you could teach yourself in the handbook. We've gone on to develop training. We've gone on to develop accredited trainers in the UK, Ireland, and in the US. Uptake is steadily increasing all over the world. Whole school districts have taken this up in individual schools. And as we've mentioned already, they report back using it with other children. So what do you need to do? What's the guidance on using RLI? What are the practical demands and what are the main features of the program? Well, I've said already it's useful for children in this age range and up to a maximum reading age of 8. You may have children in school who already read ahead of this program. If they can already read at roughly an 8-year reading level, they understand at an 8-year level, and their phonics abilities for spelling, decoding are at an 8-year level, they don't need this reading program. They might still benefit from language development, but they will be off the end of our reading program. It's aimed to get children reading to that level of competence. But you do need to check where we've been rolling this out. People have been surprised when they've done the assessments that a child who's a good reader can read aloud accurately. They've been surprised to see that their comprehension isn't keeping up and their phonics understanding isn't keeping up. So they've still implemented the program. There's guidance in the handbook too for children who are very delayed, just getting started, complete beginning readers, and children with very delayed language. So it is geared for children across the ability range. It can be delivered by teaching assistants, as we've said, and should be part of school education. And we do advise you to take this seriously. This is something we want you to implement, obviously, actually, till they reach a reading age of 8. And then we might want you to go on with language teaching, but I think you will have been encouraged to do that by that stage. But don't start without proper planning and considering running it for 20 weeks. Some children took time to settle in. Some children didn't take off even in those 20 weeks. They took off later. So it's very important not to just dabble and give up too quickly. Starting the program then. We encourage you also to train at least 2 staff. In some schools, 1 assistant did the language strand, 1 assistant did the reading strand. But even if that's not the case, this is a daily program. And if someone's off sick, we want someone else who can make sure the child gets their lesson. Ideally, set up a support team which includes the class teacher, any special needs teacher or coordinator in school, any reading specialist, the teaching assistants who are going to deliver the program, and the child's speech and language therapist. Obviously, a team approach from those with more expertise to support and advise teaching assistants is important. They can look at the initial assessment data, they can review children's progress, and be continuously advising, and also making sure, of course, that what's happening links into the class teacher's work and the curriculum, and links into the child's speech and language therapy work. If you are going to teach yourself from the handbook, or you're going to do one of our training programs, give yourself time. You need to be confident you understand the program and how to deliver it, so you don't start in a bit of a muddle. You're going to need to think where you're going to deliver, the planning, time needed, organising resources, and you start with an assessment week. We've tried to make all this as easy as possible. We have put all the materials you need for the initial assessments, ongoing planning and recording progress on the CD that comes with the handbook. And those are just some examples. The starter checklist is a simple guide to exactly what you need to do before you get started. It tells you to read the handbook, and so on. Okay, step by step instructions there that you can read. Examples are provided for all the assessments. So if you look at the high frequency word cards, that would be an example. Everything we ask you to assess, we've put in sheets you can print off that have the assessment materials on them. They have all the words for the child to read, all the letter sounds for the child to give you the letter sounds. They also have a record form to record the child's performance. For book grading, there's a record form. For every assessment, there's a record form. Okay. Now, there is a structure, as I said before, and this is it. Okay. For the reading strand, it's always going to follow that structure. Easy book, instructional book, sight word reading, letter sounds, phonology, phonics work, back to teaching the instructional book. The language, introducing a new word, reinforcing its meaning, using it in connected spoken language, using it in sentences, and then recording it, writing it down, using the word in sentences you're going to write down in a book that you're going to build up over 2 weeks. I'm going to step through each of these, but you can see this structure is the same every day. The children got used to it, they loved it. They start the reading component with success. They choose their own easy book to read, and of course once they get going they have a little box of easy books, and these are books they can read with with 95% plus accuracy, and of course as they read them every day, it's success at the start and they're increasing their fluency. Individualizing the program. I've said this several times. Children with Down syndrome have a wide range of abilities, interests and motivations, so it's very important it's pitched at the right level for your child. So assessments are taken at the start. We'll look first at the assessments for reading, and then we'll turn to the assessments for language. We take assessments at the start to determine what the child already knows and to the right starting level for each aspect of the teaching. But then, of course, we're going to encourage you to keep ongoing assessments and records. And this is not difficult. It's not difficult, but it makes a huge difference to know exactly what the child knows and exactly what you're teaching next. We give you suggestions for ways to adapt to make material easier or more difficult depending on the child, particularly in the language strand. Okay. And encourage you, of course, to be confident in your own knowledge. And I've said already that on the DVD there are examples of the children with a range of skills and abilities engaging in the activities. And obviously watching it is much better than listening to me. So we're going to see quite a number of video clips in this next section. Okay, so the reading strand starts with this assessment for learning, and I'm going to illustrate that because I've got the assessment form on the next slide. The strand, we're going to look at the children's knowledge of letters, sounds, phonics, their sight word knowledge, what high frequency words they can already read, their text level knowledge, what they understand about books, and then there is a graded reading test. That's not to give you a reading age, it's to enable you to link the child's current reading ability with our book grading scheme, so you choose books at the right level. This assessment is essential, okay, and all the materials are there, as I've said. Now, I think this reading skills assessment form will give you a clearer view of what I'm telling you about the basic assessment before starting the reading strand. And you can see on this form, we're going to assess letter sound knowledge, text level knowledge, word level knowledge, as I've already said. Letter sound knowledge, the examples are starting right at the beginning. Does the child actually know the difference between a word and a letter? Do they understand the words first, middle, and last? If we're going to start talking about first sounds, can they identify letters in words? You'll see in green reference to where you'll find the resource on the CD or the page number in the handbook. There's a small test of the child's phonological awareness. Can they identify words that start with specific sounds when they just listen? So can they identify words that start with s, words that start with p, p, words that start with t, t? And then, if they are already making progress with their reading, can they identify those phonemes in words and use them as cues to decode? And then importantly, which letter sounds the child already knows. And of course, these are the common sounds that go with a letter. And you have a sheet with all the letters on, and you ask the child, obviously, to tell you the sound that goes with the letter. And for those who are not in the UK, we teach children the sound that links with the lowercase letter. That's where we start. Okay, so sound links to lowercase letters, which is what you need, of course, to use the sounds for reading and spelling. Then text level knowledge. Can the child, what does the child already know about books? The title, the author, where a story starts, page numbers, what is a sentence? Now, and then can they show you where to start to read and follow it from left to right? And if they are already a fluent reader, can they recognize their own errors when they read? So a series of questions about their text level knowledge, what they already know about books. And then the third section is sight word knowledge in terms of reading high frequency words. Okay. There's a couple of examples of finding words. Do they know the difference between a word and a number? Finding words in scenes. And again, you've got the resources numbered on the CD. And then what high frequency words can they already read? And we provide these in the way they do in the UK. We do them in the UK, which is letters and sounds. First 100 high frequency words and then a second 100, which takes you to 200. If in your country you use the Dolch word lists, well, then you can use those for the assessment. They're basically the same set of words, of course, in English. And these high frequency words include, well, they're high frequency. They're the words that occur a lot, and therefore a lot of them are the little grammatical words, okay? But a lot of them are also not regular in terms of phonically regular, like of and was, okay? Which is why they need to be learned by sight. Now, one essential part of the program is to take a running record. That also is easy. Again, it may sound daunting. Basically, you listen to the child read and you record what they've done. You a tick for a word that's correct, a line for a word that's omitted, an up arrow for a word that's put in. You're going to record exactly what they do, but in a very simple code. Our running record is very much simpler than the running record systems many of you use in schools, okay? But our running record system's adequate for what we need. Simple, quick to do. You'll soon get the idea, okay? The instructions are in the handbook. There's an example on the DVD, and the next video clip shows an example of a child during a running record. And all the video clips that are now following in here were taken in the schools during the study, so you see the children with their teaching assistants. It's in the last term of the study when we went out and collected video for training.
Can you read this book for me?
We go shopping.
We go shopping. Okay.
We go shopping.
We go shopping.
We going.
No, not going. That says we go shopping. Okay.
We got some balloons at the supermarket.
Good boy.
We got some triangles at the supermarket. We got some hats at the supermarket.
Good boy.
We got some streamers at the supermarket.
Well done.
We got some cakes at the supermarket.
And why did they need some cakes and candles and buns and streamers and balloons?
And then my mum's birthday party.
It's going to be Mum's birthday party. So
Happy birthday, Mum!
good boy. Well done. Well done. Right, okay. And
Let's talk a little bit then about the book reading component. Easy level book, I've told you already, is one the child can largely read completely, greater than 94% accuracy. A new book at an instructional level needs to be one they can already read 90% of the words of at least. Otherwise, we consider it too difficult, frustrating. So a focus of this program is finely graded books moving in very small steps, okay? And in order, of course, to know how accurately the child is reading, you need to take that running record. Then you can work out accuracy. But taking the running record also allows you to identify words you might need to teach as sight words and where the child is struggling and what strategies they're using. So the running record informs teaching. It also informs assessing the difficulty of the book for the child. So component one of the teaching of the reading strand is reading the child reads the easy book. Component two, they read you the book or the new page they're learning in their instructional book, and you take a running record. You then do some sight words. You then do some phonics work. You then return in teaching mode to the book they're learning to read, and that may not be a new book. Obviously, if they succeeded in reading their instructional book completely, you'll be moving on to a new instructional book, but you might just be moving to a new page. And you will read 3 to 4 books at the same level of difficulty before you move on, before you move up to more difficult books. Okay. And in the instructional session, of course, it's shared and guided reading. And then that becomes the next book, of course, for assessment with running record tomorrow. The video in the next slide shows a book reading example, which shows you a book made for an early reader and with text, designed with text for his language understanding level.
Good boy, Daddy is eating cereal. Yum, yum. Who's that? Max is eating pizza. Is that your favourite? Granny. Good boy, Granny is eating a biscuit. Good boy, Grandad is eating fruit, and he's eating a plum.
Right, so just a few comments about books. We used a range of real reading books. By that we mean we didn't use a reading scheme. We selected books with easy language because for these children they're very language delayed. So for the younger ones, these might be books really designed for 3 and 4-year-olds with just a fun story, a sentence a page. They need to be motivating and interesting to the child. We worked with levels from complete beginners up to reading ages of 8. I've already told you that 3 or 4 books at each level, and the starting point would be determined by that graded reading scheme, but many readers in our project were at the start. And I've already explained the running record decides when they've cracked this book and you can move on. Now, the books are very finely graded using a Hatcher graded scheme designed by Peter Hatcher, fully explained in the handbook, and you are provided on the CD with full instructions, exactly what you do to grade the book, and an Excel spreadsheet, which when you put the measures in, works out the book grade for you. There's also a website with, in the UK, graded books available on the Cumbria website in the UK, and we're working to get a US one up. Sight word learning then, so component 3, teaching sight words. It's a strength for many children with Down syndrome. Many words have to be taught by sight. Okay, we've stressed that already. But any word can be taught by sight. We always start by teaching the children family names, so we can make books that include their family members, class friends, and so on. Characters in books will have names that may need to be taught as sight words, highly motivating words, okay. Those high frequency words, new topic words that are being used in school may be taught as sight words. Tricky words are those that are not phonically regular or decodable. As skilled adult readers, we read by sight. So the bigger sight vocabulary, the better. There's nothing wrong with teaching words by sight. Okay. So building up sight words. And the next, no, is it? No. Okay, building up sight words with a range of fun activities. People did all sorts. They made sure they practiced ones that were already known so they don't get forgotten, while adding in new ones. Very important to keep a complete record of all words the child can read. And the next slide simply gives you an example of one of these sight word sessions and how this child was working with sight words. Her speech is not all that easy to follow, but you will note that as she takes the sight words down and reads them, it's a random list, of course. She clearly understands the word when she reads it and wants to talk about it and use the word in a sentence with her assistant.
So, now it's time for us to have a look at our words. Are you going to pick some today?
I don't know.
Swan. Are we going to have lots? These are the ones we're still learning, aren't they? Are we going to have some that we already know as well? Good girl. Goodness me, we're going to be busy, aren't we? Right, which one should we start with? Excellent, well done. That. Good girl. I'll put some up here. Is that what Mrs. Canning said?
Yeah.
Very good.
Oh.
Out. Good reading.
Oh.
Out. Good girl. Oh, you know this one. Children. Lots of children at school. That was a lovely.
The fourth component then is the phonics, which we stress is not straightforward. It's letters, sounds and phonology. It's learning the links between letters and sounds, but it's being able to hear sounds in words. That's the phonological awareness. Children need to be able to play listening games and identify words that start with a particular sound. You need to be able to hear the sounds in words to use letter sound knowledge, to think how to spell or to put words together when you're trying to read. Blending and segmenting. Segmenting is breaking the word into its composite sounds, and blending, of course, is once you can sound out the letters, can you work out what the word is? Can you blend them into a word? So you've got to be able to hear sounds in words. If you want to spell, you've got to be able to think, okay, cat, that's going to be k, a, t. So we provide for work, teaching letter sound links, doing phonological awareness games, linking letters to sounds. And that's an example, I think, that brings it to life. In the letter sound component, learning new letter sounds and revising ones we know. In the phonological awareness game, we're using visual supports. The child's got pictures of tea, peas, jam and juice on the table. The TA is sounding the word out. The TA is saying, I went shopping and bought some tea. J, a, the. And the child has to listen to that, choose the right picture. So they don't have to be able to say the word. They don't have to be able to blend in the spoken mode. They can listen to it, put it together, choose a picture. We will remove the picture prompts at the stage we think they don't need them. And then linking it to reading, seeing the written words, okay. In the phonological awareness task, they're simply listening to words sounded out and choosing pictures. In the last activity, they're now reading the printed words and seeing how these words are written and how you might use them in a shopping list. Children vary very widely in progress. Don't underestimate. It's very important children do this phonics work. Listening to sounds will also, we hope, help their ability to hear sounds and produce sounds in their spoken language. Okay. So learning about letter sounds, discriminating sounds, doing this phonics work, although it's quite uphill for some of the children, in our experience they do eventually get it, though that may not be till they're 9 or 10. But along the way it will be helping their listening discrimination, for being able to discriminate sounds, for hearing the difference between words like cat, hat, mat, so they can learn the meanings. It will also hopefully be improving their spoken language, so stick with it. And the next two slides really illustrate children at different stages. The first video clip, they're playing I Spy, and he's being asked, of course, to identify sounds that start, words that start with an initial sound with picture prompts. You'll also see a fun strategy. They're taking turns. They're playing the game together. This is very motivating. We need to take the pressure off our learners. It's motivating to do this with other children in the class, and to take turns with your assistant. Actually, she often gets hers wrong, so he's doing them all, but it's a good strategy. And I've said already, we want to prompt success and make learning fun. The second video shows a child, quite a young child, who can actually do all this in the listening mode, can deal with the phonological awareness and do the phonics in the way we want all children to be able to do it. So don't underestimate, and don't and recognise it may take quite a long time, but you keep going.
Is it? Tell me. I think I know. Whisper. Snake. Shall I turn it? 'Cause it's a bit of a reach. Is he right? Oh, he's right. I spy with my little eye. Ready for this? Something beginning with b, 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 b. What's that?
Football.
It's a b, b,
Ball.
ball. Let's see if you're right. Turn it over. Oh, well done.
Boss of the red.
Goat?
Foot.
Oh, Mrs. Robinson, tell me. What is it? Tell me what it is. Nest.
We're going to do the same thing again, but this time we're not going to have any pictures. It's a little bit harder. We've got to listen really carefully. Are you ready?
Yeah.
The first word is d, a, d.
Dad.
Well done.
My dad.
Your dad.
Daddy.
Your dad, is he called Daddy?
Yes.
And is he at work today?
Yes.
He is. Okay, ready for our next one? Okay, this time we've got s, a, d.
Sad.
Can you show me your sad face? Sad face. Right, our last one, ready? It.
Sit.
Good girl, you're sitting on your chair beautifully, aren't you? Well done, Mark. That was
Right, so we've got to the end of discussing the reading strand, and I hope I have put across that it's very much a comprehensive reading program. We want the children to get as far as they can with the phonics and their alphabetic skills. It's comprehensive. It is teaching children to successfully read books right from the start and to build up their sight word abilities and their phonics abilities little by little. Now let's take a look at the language strand. This tells you what I've said already. The language strand is intended to teach new words, get them into spoken sentences, record them in written sentences, increase their breadth of vocabulary knowledge, more words, and increase their depth of understanding of the words that they are beginning to use. We want this to be highly interactive, and that doesn't come across all that easily from just discussing this. On the CD, if you're going to start this, we provide you with 4 weeks of lessons. In the project, we designed things to go across 2 weeks, and of course all the children had to do the same stuff because we were measuring what they knew at the beginning, measuring what they'd learned at the end. So it was fixed vocabulary teaching, language teaching. And we provided picture materials and games and activities, but they were just a backup. Children learn if they are engaged actively, if they can feel things that are hot and cold, if they can heat soup, try soup. So all the advice was to bring this to life, to make language real by children being involved in activities in which you're going to use the language. How are we going to choose it? Well, we worked in themes, and we would encourage you to take the structure, but to take topics that are relevant for the child, okay? So we worked in themes, but you want to choose things that are motivating and appropriate for the child, their age and interests, and what they're learning in school. We want, of course, words where we can take pictures and image them, though if we're going to act out, take video clips on our iPads and phones and so on, that's not essential, and some things it's better to do video. If you want to talk about what you did yesterday and what you're going to do tomorrow, that's not so easy with picture materials. So use video as well. It doesn't all have to be new. We'll find children understand quite a lot they're not yet using, or only have limited understanding of words and sentences they're using. We would suggest you link the language strand of this program to classwork. You can use a theme that you're teaching in class, a topic that you're working on in class. You can use that to consolidate this child's language learning. There are likely to be new words to be learned for the topic. We can put those words into sentences. We can use the structure we've used here, but link it to classroom work. You can also link it, of course, to things that are meaningful that the child likes doing, like swimming or going to the beach, language they want to use outside school as well as inside school. And so it's important to consult parents and therapists. We used DSE checklists. Now, we have vocabulary checklists and sentences and grammar checklists, which we designed some years ago for our own language work. We are very well aware that vocabulary is learnt slowly by children with Down syndrome. The size of children's spoken vocabulary predicts where they'll have got to with putting sentences together and using grammar. And this has been shown by ourselves and a number of researchers looking at language development in children with Down syndrome in Spain, in Sweden, in the US, okay, in Italy. The number of different words a child says predicts their grammatical development. So the number of different words they say is important for learning about the world, but it's also important for grammar. We got parents to complete our vocabulary checklists at the start of the study, and we'd urge you to do the same. They cover an 800-word core vocabulary. You can identify the words the child understands, the words they can sign, the words they can say. So you've got a complete record of core vocabulary that matters, and most children have at the age of 3. That's core vocabulary for talking in sentences about their everyday lives. Okay. So we really would urge you to do that, because you will discover many children of 6, 7, 8, 9 do not yet have 800 spoken words in their vocabulary. They're not using even quite simple sentences and grammar. So we would urge you to do those checklists, and we recommend you know all the words your child can say at this stage. When they get beyond 800 words, it's too difficult and probably doesn't matter, but they do need that core vocabulary. So I've already said we want a complete record of all the words they can read. We also want a complete record of all the words they understand, and separately all the words they can say, because they'll understand a lot of words they're not yet saying. Okay. So this language business is important. Think about it. Okay. The language strand, then, we did themes, and we'd encourage you to think about this structure, whatever topic you're taking. So it was a word a day, and we included nouns, verbs, adjectives, prepositions. We want all these different parts of speech so we can build proper sentences and talk about lots of different things. The words might have been taught one at a time, or if they were contrasting, like tall and short, together. Okay. Now, we would work across that. By the end of the 2 weeks, so we'd introduce a new word each day, talk about it, make a sentence, put it in the topic book. Now, it doesn't mean at the end of 2 weeks they cracked this and knew all of this, but they'd got a book we could now use to continue to develop their knowledge and practice. Okay. And these slides elaborate what you're going to do in each of the 4 steps in the language strand. Introduce a new word. We did give pictures and print because some of the children were already readers. We did give those sight words, but TAs again were encouraged to do this in a way that worked for the child. So if the word was soup, they would have already discussed this with parents at home. We tried to involve parents, find out what children were interested in. They would know the theme that was coming up. They could send materials into school. They could reinforce what was going on at home. But they could help us link this to what this child's interested in and this child's experiences. So this emphasis on linking it into the child's real world and what they do and what they understand. That's an example of a word web, which is one way, of course, of developing the understandings that go with the word soup. You might be talking about a soup that's thick or runny or has lumps in it and bits of vegetables. You might be talking about a clear cold soup or a hot soup, and so on. So this is this whole issue of developing the children's depth of knowledge around the word soup, different meanings, different types of soup, and so on. And the next video illustrates that new word learning. And again, the little girl's not all that easy to understand, but you will see they started on words for a new theme.
what our word is today. Let's have a look. I'll show you. What did you say?
Moped.
Motorbike. Well done. And this word says motorbike. Look. There we go. There's our word. And a motorbike is a vehicle with 2 wheels. It's like a bicycle, but it has a motor. So it's a bit like a bike when you ride your bike. I've got some pictures. Shall I show you? Oh, wow. It's a very shiny motorbike, isn't it? You've got lots of pictures. What can you see in that one? What is it? What can you see?
Moped.
The motorbike. Good girl. Oh, look at that one. It's up in the air. The man's doing a trick. It's a funny one, isn't it? Oh, wow. That's a very... What colour's this one? Red.
We're then going to go on to reinforce the meaning in the way I've just discussed, really. Think of different ways in which this word is used. As we go on, and we might be doing tall and short, for example, you can do matching and sorting activities. You can have pictures of tall people and short people. If we're doing things that are crunchy or things that are runny, we could have pictures to sort things into the crunchy ones, the runny ones, and so on. So we can do those sorts of activities, but I've also already emphasized bringing this to life, okay? Now, the next video clip then illustrates the TA developing work on shells and developing words around the textures of materials and so on.
You see this one?
Yeah.
It's got all lines on it, hasn't it? Going across. Can you see them? Yeah. What about this one, Martha? Can you tell me about this one? What does that look like on the end there? What does it look like?
A circle.
A bit like a circle, doesn't it? It's a spiral, Martha, isn't it, when it goes around like that? Martha, what about this one here? How is this one different to this one? Can you tell me? Don't scratch the table, please. How is this shell different to this one? Do you think, is it bigger or smaller?
Bigger.
Bigger. And you feel it. How does it feel? How does it
Soft.
feel? Soft? Can you think of any other words to describe how it feels? Right, you tell me about that one. How does that one feel?
Hold it, please.
You want me to hold it?
Yeah.
How does this one feel?
Bumpy.
It does feel bumpy, doesn't it?
So we can work at the children listening and joining in and understanding words at a receptive level, but of course we want to get them into their productive language. And we want the child to be totally engaged, so you want to encourage the child to generate a sentence if you can. So even if they only generate 2 words like shell rough, we're going to take that and say some shells are rough. Some shells are smooth. But if you work from what the child wants to tell you, you're just expanding their language at a level that's appropriate for them. You're going from what they're thinking about and just giving them the correct sentence structure for what they're saying. That's called expansion. You do it naturally when children are only using 2 and 3 keywords to talk. You give back complete sentences. But I'm making the point we want the child to be thinking and fully engaged in understanding what's happening. So encourage them to generate an utterance, encourage them to decide what they want to write in their book, even though you may have to help them with the writing, and even though they may not yet be readers. We would make books for all children as a record of what they're learning. It's even more important for the non-reader. Otherwise they have no record of their learning because they can't write and because they can't read. People don't record their work in topic activities like they do for other children. Okay, so really, really important that we make a book together with whatever support the child needs, and then we can read that book to the child. We can go back and talk about the pictures. We've taken pictures of them engaged in the activities, ideally with a phone or an iPad or whatever you use. You can use a program like Special Stories to do this. That's Special iApps very, very easy to use on an iPad in real time in the classroom. There's no excuses, in other words, about not recording children's learning in real time and then making a record in pictures and print. It doesn't have to be complicated. We advised teaching assistants not to get too carried away with finding pictures, cutting, sticking, gluing, because it takes too much time and it distracts from the actual focus on what we're learning. So here's a very easy example. You know, you put things on a pizza or in a sandwich and you can see they cut up. They just drew a circle for a pizza. They cut up triangles of paper to represent a sandwich. You put them in the sandwich on the pizza. Very simple. Doesn't have to be complicated or take up lots of time. Topic books were extremely popular. Okay, they were very popular. They provide communication with parents. Children took them home. They shared them with their peers. It was great fun. They're adding a page a day. Each day, you're recording what you've done with that word that day on a page in the book. So by the end of 2 weeks, you've got a topic book, okay? Record of what's been taught. We can go back and talk about it. A reference book. And for those who could read, it often became an easy reading book and could be done in a variety of ways. You could do it using clicker. You could stick printed words in and so on. The next video shows a child making a page in his topic book.
Right, what sentence are we going to write about our drawers then?
Our drawers you pulling out.
Our drawers you
Pulling
can pull out. Our drawers you can pull out. Right, okay, could you write that sentence for me, please?
And there's another example of a topic book where they're doing exactly what I've just urged. They're taking pictures real time in school of what she's actually doing. You may also be interested to know that research at the Open University in the UK shows that all children learn to read faster from personal books. All children. They learn to read faster if we make books about their own world and their own lives, which is what we always do at the starting point for children with Down syndrome. In the book, there's a section about the language strand and what to do. You get 4 weeks, 2 themes of scripted work on the CD and suggestions for teaching activities. So on the CD, in the book, there's guidance. On the CD, there's a lot more guidance. Each daily lesson has a lesson plan that you can print off and tells you a lot about how to deliver what you're doing that day, but ideas for additional activities. So you really do want to work through the scripted ones because there's a lot more advice on how to do the language strand on the daily lesson plans provided. Okay, the daily lesson plans provided with the 2 themes provided. So you want to work through that and use that in addition to what it tells you in the handbook overall about developing your own materials. As I've said already, you get a handbook with instructions on each component. Everything for the reading strand, everything you need to do with the assessments first, grading books, taking running records, and then exactly how you're going to do your book reading, your sight word teaching, your letters, sounds, phonology, phonics teaching. Okay, it's all spelled out in the book in a way we hope means you could just work from the book. Okay, obviously you can purchase that book from our website and it comes with those DVD resources and CD. We have continued to develop additional resources to support you. And the best thing to do is keep an eye on our website as things change all the time. But we do have an email discussion forum and a Facebook RLI group you can sign up to. And that's a really very effective way for us to answer questions and provide advice. We are developing online self-paced training courses for educators in the classroom. We are designing training courses online for more accredited trainers. And if you get in touch with us, we already have, of course, accredited trainers, and we could put you in touch with them if there is someone working in your area. I hope by this stage, of course, I have persuaded you that you may like to take this up. I've persuaded you there's a scientific evidence base and that this is a program that really will help you make your teaching more effective in the classroom and help children to progress faster. So I'd like to end with just some feedback we received from a teacher who picking up the handbook and starting to implement this without any backup from the research group. Because it mirrors what I felt when I finished this project, I asked myself, what have I learned about teaching children with Down syndrome to read and develop their language? Because I've been doing that for a long time. And I felt what I'd learned was what mattered was the structure, the very small steps, making sure we're teaching in small steps consistently, that we know what the children know, we know what we're building on, and that we do this intensively. And that's reflected in the feedback from this teacher. Since we started the program 4 weeks ago, they've made more progress than they did in the last year. Without a short, sharp, regular intervention like RLI, which encompasses all reading skills on an almost daily basis, I don't think these kids are going to make the progress they are capable of. And I think that's an important take-home message. Small steps, structure, intensity matter. But also it actually makes teaching easier, which I think I've already said. We've left on the end of this set of slides just two other links for you where the program is mentioned on sites that provide independent assessment in the UK. Thank you for joining us. I hope you will consider taking up the program in your school. And as I've said already, keep in touch with our website. We are there to help. We can answer questions, particularly on the Facebook or email pages. And we hope you found this interesting and that you will implement the program and see the benefits for children. Thank you.